the unspoken magnetism of men over 40. She walks into the room. It could be anywhere. A dinner party, a networking event, a quiet lounge after work hours, or just a cafe on a Thursday evening in a city that never seems to rest. The energy is familiar. A low hum of performance wrapped in pleasantries. Men scanning, smiling, posturing. Some do it with polished ease, trained by years of social rituals. Others are trying a little too hard. The laugh slightly louder than it needs to be. The compliment that feels rehearsed. The confidence that trembles just behind the eyes. It's not a bad scene. It's just predictable. Then something shifts. Her attention drifts away from the ones making noise, and finds someone who isn't. He isn't holding court. He isn't surrounded by a crowd. He isn't even really in the room in the way. The others are. But he's there. Fully, completely. And without trying, he commands the space he occupies. He's sitting a little apart. Not isolated. Just sovereign. A quiet confidence surrounds him. Not arrogance. Not distance. But groundedness. He's not waiting to be noticed. He's not dressing for attention. He's not scanning the room for opportunity. He's simply observing. Maybe sipping a drink. Maybe reading a message. Maybe just watching the way people move, speak, reach for one another. She notices how calm he is. It's not a forced calm. The kind people wear like a tailored suit to hide their nerves. It's something deeper. Something lived in. He looks like a man who's not running from anything, not chasing anything, not proving anything. And in a world full of men still trying to be somebody, that absence of need is magnetic. She can't quite name it. It's not about age. It's not about style. It's not even about attraction in the traditional sense. It's presence. Real, quiet, settled presence. The kind that doesn't flicker when it's ignored. The kind that doesn't change when it's seen. The kind of presence that only comes from time. From trial. From loss. From unlearning. She doesn't realize she's turned toward him again. Not consciously. But her body knows. Her intuition knows. Something about this man feels safe. Not in a boring way. Not in a predictable way. But in a strong way. The way a well-built foundation makes you feel when the storm begins. The difference between image and essence. There was a time when she might have missed him. Back when youth and chaos seemed exciting. Back when the loudest man in the room felt like the most confident. Back when speed and unpredictability passed for passion. But life has a way of teaching what no one tells you in your 20s. Charm fades. Presence remains. The younger men in the room are polished, charming and well-rehearsed. They've read the dating scripts. They've learned how to tell stories with the right pauses. They can hold eye contact, flash a smile, compliment your dress just right. And yet, something in them still feels unfinished. Not in a bad way, just hurried. Like they're still building the character they want to play. But the man over 40, he's not acting. He's not inventing. He's being. There is no performance. Just presence. Just essence. He knows who he is. Not because someone told. him, but because he earned that knowing through fire. The fire that forges. Men, you don't become this kind of man by accident. You become him by breaking first, by thinking you had it all figured out, and then losing it. By giving too much to the wrong people, and learning boundaries the hard way. By attaching your worth to things, status, sex, success, and discovering none of them satisfy the soul for long. You become this man after the world has humbled you, softened you, burned off the arrogance and left only what matters. He's been through it, and because he's been through it, he no longer needs to broadcast strength. His strength is quiet now. It doesn't walk ahead of him. It walks with him. And when you meet a man like that, your body knows before your brain does. This is someone who will not fall apart when things get hard. The absence of performance, and why it speaks louder than words. He doesn't need to fill the silence. He's made peace with it. That alone sets him apart. You see, most people aren't actually afraid of being alone. They're afraid of what rises to the surface in the silence. Their insecurity, their emptiness, their need for external validation. So they talk too much. They move too quickly. They keep the music loud and the conversations superficial. Not because they want to connect, but because they can't handle the space in between. But this man? He doesn't avoid the quiet. He inhabits it. It's the space where he rebuilt himself, where he met the parts of himself no one else could fix, where he learned how to breathe without needing applause. That's why his presence feels so rare. Because he's not rushing to prove anything. He's not scrambling to be liked. He's not throwing charm like confetti in hopes of getting noticed. He simply exists, unshaken. The man who doesn't flinch. When you speak to him, he looks at you, fully. He's not scanning the room behind you. He's not nodding along while waiting to reply. He's with you. And when you speak about something vulnerable, he doesn't flinch. He doesn't joke to escape it. He doesn't offer cliches to fix it. He just listens, because he knows what pain sounds like. Because he's carried it. Because he's made room for it in himself. And no longer fears it in others. You feel it in the way he holds space. There's no rush, no rescue mission, no emotional turbulence, just presence. The kind of presence that says, you don't have to be anyone else right now. I'm not going anywhere. Emotional maturity. The quiet revolution. This is what emotional maturity looks like. Not in books, not in hashtags, but in real life. It's the ability to feel deeply without drowning. 2. Stay steady without shutting down. To hold grief and gratitude in the same breath. And most of all, it's the ability to be with someone without trying to control their experience. This is what younger men so often lack. Not because they're flawed, but because they haven't yet been undone. They haven't yet had to sit in a room with themselves for long enough to know which parts are real. But this man, he's done that work, and because of it, he can love without possession. He can lead without force. He can care without collapsing. That level of steadiness, it doesn't come from reading Stoic quotes on Instagram. It comes from living them. from applying restraint when it would be easier to react, from choosing peace over ego, from walking away, not to punish, but to protect what matters inside you. The confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. True confidence is silent. It doesn't need to walk into the room first. It doesn't need to interrupt. It doesn't need to be the punchline of every joke. It's in how he listens, how he pauses, how he says no without explaining, and yes without attachment. This kind of man doesn't ask for permission to be who he is. He just is. He's not reckless, but he's not seeking approval either. He's thoughtful, but not apologetic. He's strong, but not performative about it. And that, more than anything, is what draws people in. Especially her. Because in a world where everyone is trying to impress her, he's the only one simply being himself. And that tells her more than words ever could. The nervous system remembers why she feels safe with him before she knows why. She may not realize it at first. Her mind might not connect the dots. But her body knows. Something in her nervous system settles when he's near. Her breath slows a little. Her shoulders drop half an inch. Her guard, always on standby in a world of surface-level charm and emotional immaturity, finally eases. And it's not because he's done anything extraordinary. He hasn't made a grand gesture. He hasn't delivered a line from a movie. He hasn't tried to seduce her with bravado. No. He simply exists in a way that tells her, this space is safe. This man is not dangerous to your spirit. This presence does not require you to shrink. And that feeling is everything. Attraction. Without pressure, most men misunderstand what women truly respond to. They think it's the chase. The clever joke. The alpha energy. The perfectly timed compliment. The mysterious, emotionally unavailable persona that so many confuse with depth. But real attraction, lasting attraction, isn't about pressure. It's about space. Space to breathe, to speak honestly, to not feel judged, to not feel watched like a performance. The man over 40 with true emotional depth doesn't crowd her. He doesn't push. He doesn't play games. And strangely enough, that's why she moves toward him. Because, in a world where everyone is pulling, he's simply holding. Holding space. Holding dignity. Holding stillness. He's done needing to prove anything. At some point in his life, this man stopped performing. Not because he gave up, but because he woke up. He woke up to the exhausting lie that he needed to earn love by achievement, that he needed to be perfect to be chosen, that vulnerability was weakness, that silence was failure. He's no longer chasing attention. He's giving energy only where it's mutual, where it's reciprocal, where it's real. That's what makes him powerful. Not his status, not his bank account, not his appearance, but his clarity. He knows what he values, and he no longer apologizes for valuing it. She responds to what he no longer needs. It's ironic. The moment he stopped needing validation from women was the moment women started responding to him more. Not because he became emotionally distant, But because he became emotionally sovereign, he doesn't seek completion from her. He doesn't outsource his sense of self to her reaction. He doesn't place the burden of his self-worth on her acceptance. And that makes her trust him. Because he's not grasping. He's not needy. He's not a boy trying to make a woman into a mother. He's a man who has already raised himself through fire, loss, truth, and reflection. And now he simply offers his presence. Not as bait, not as proof, but as a gift. One she's free to receive or walk past. Either way, he remains whole. The quiet authority that needs no permission. He doesn't need a spotlight. He doesn't need a microphone. He doesn't need the loudest laugh in the room. And yet, when he speaks, people lean in. Not because his voice is loud, but because his silence carried weight long before he said a word. This is the kind of authority that can't be granted by title or bought by money. It can't be mimicked by those who haven't been through anything real. It is quiet, and yet it changes the room. He doesn't lead with dominance. He leads with stability, and stability, in a world full of emotional volatility, is magnetic. He's unmoved by the wrong things. It's not that he doesn't feel. It's not that he's detached or indifferent. It's that he no longer gives energy to things that don't deserve his inner peace. He doesn't chase chaos. He doesn't fight battles that drain him for the sake of being right. He doesn't try to win people who don't know how to value depth. Instead, he waits. He observes, and then he moves with purpose. This is the man who has become unshakable, not because life was easy, but because he stayed still while life tried to move him. He's been rejected, and didn't collapse. He's been misunderstood, and didn't explain himself to everyone. He's been alone, and learned to enjoy his own company instead of fearing it, and now he walks like a man who doesn't flinch. She feels it, even if she can't name it. She won't be able to explain it to her friends. She'll say things like, "He's just calm. There's something about him." He doesn't try. But I can't stop thinking about him. They'll ask what he does, how old he is, what makes him attractive, and she'll realize it's not one thing. It's everything he doesn't need to do. He doesn't seek permission. He doesn't wait for recognition. He doesn't negotiate his values. He doesn't collapse when things don't go his way. He remains. He's the lighthouse, not the wave. And for a woman who's tired of noise, of boys in men's bodies, of performing for attention, his stillness feels like home. When magnetism meets meaning, there is chemistry. And then, there is resonance. Chemistry is spark. Resonance is echo. She feels the difference when she's with him. She feels seen, not scanned. She feels heard, not handled. She feels safe, not smothered. He doesn't just attract her attention. He holds it, gently, without expectation, without pressure. He makes her feel like her soul isn't too much, that her softness is safe, that her complexity won't be punished or fixed or simplified. This isn't seduction. This is sanctuary, thoughts. Turning point somewhere in the quiet, in a glance across the room, in a moment between noise. She realizes something. He's not like the others. He's not trying to be chosen. He's already chosen himself. And that's why she finds herself drawn closer. Not because he pulled her, but because he didn't. But this kind of presence, this kind of steadiness, this kind of quiet power, doesn't just arrive with age. It arrives with depth. And depth isn't given. It's earned. So how does a man get here? What happens in the decades before this moment? The years of searching, failing, breaking, and healing, that allow a man to walk into a room like this? That's what we'll uncover next. Chapter 2. The depth that only time can give. He wasn't always like this. There was a time when his confidence was loud, when his ambition outpaced his wisdom, when he filled silences with noise, not because he had something to say, but because he feared what might surface in the quiet. He used to walk into rooms hoping to be noticed. He measured his worth in how often his phone lit up, how quickly someone replied, how impressed they looked when he spoke about himself. But something changed. Or rather, life changed him. Not suddenly, not all at once, but over time, over years. Over the slow, necessary erosion of illusion, and what's left now is something real. Something rooted, something heavy, not in burden, but in gravity. Something that can't be faked, hurried, or performed. Depth. Depth doesn't come from books. He once thought he could read his way into becoming a man. He consumed books on leadership, relationships, finance, confidence. He memorized quotes from Stoics, philosophers, warriors. He posted them, recited them, practiced sounding wise in conversation. But eventually, life humbled him. Because life doesn't ask what you've read. It asks what you can endure. It tests what you've internalized. Not when things are going well, but when they aren't. When love leaves. When your plans collapse. When the mask slips and you don't like what's underneath. That's when depth begins. Not when you quote Marcus, Aurelius, but when you become him in action. When you choose stillness in chaos. When you swallow your pride to keep your integrity. When you walk away, not to prove a point, but to protect your peace. The collapse that introduced the real you. Every man, at some point, reaches his wall, his breaking point, his reckoning. The moment when the scaffolding of who he thought he was falls apart. Maybe it was the end of a marriage. Maybe it was a failed business. Maybe it was burnout so deep, it hollowed him out. Whatever it was. He remembers the silence afterward. The disbelief. The numbness. The terrifying clarity. He remembers thinking, who am I without this? What now? Was it all for nothing? And it wasn't. Because that collapse, however devastating, was the beginning of something deeper. It stripped away the noise, the armor, the performative layers. And what was left? A man, just a man. No title, no image, no narrative. Just him. And that was the most honest place he'd ever been. Pain is the doorway to wisdom. He didn't want the pain. He didn't ask for it. He didn't welcome it. And in the beginning, he ran from it, numbed it, distracted himself with work, with women, with wine, with whatever would keep him from feeling the weight of it. But eventually, pain waited him out. Because pain is patient, and when it finally caught up, he had two choices: to keep running, or to face it. So he sat with it. Not for an hour, not for a week, but for months, sometimes years. He learned to stop asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" That question changed everything. Because instead of trying to escape his pain, he began to listen to it. And pain became his teacher. It showed him what mattered. It taught him how strong he wasn't, and how strong he could become. It revealed where he had lied to himself. And it broke down the fragile confidence he once depended on, so that something unshakable could be built in its place. From outer identity to inner clarity, the slow return to yourself. Before the collapse, everything he was came from the outside: the job title, the relationship status, the salary, the car, the way people looked at him when he walked into the room. He didn't realize it, but he had constructed a self out of mirrors, each one reflecting back what others thought of him, wanted from him, projected onto him. And then, the mirrors cracked, and he saw it. How much of his identity wasn't his? How much he had been performing, adjusting, shrinking, flexing, apologizing, overcompensating. Not because he was weak, but because he was unsure, and the world is relentless toward the unsure. So he built armor, and lived inside it, until the armor grew too heavy to carry. The most courageous question: who am I without all this? In the silence after the storm, this question comes. Who am I without my roles? Without being the provider, the achiever, the winner, the one who has it all together? What if none of that is left? What if no one is watching? What if no one is clapping? Who are you then? This question doesn't land softly. It shatters. It shakes. It strips. It stares you down. But in that confrontation, something sacred happens. You meet yourself. Not the version that was built to survive in the world, but the version that was buried beneath it. The one who still believes in integrity. The one who longs for depth, not attention. The one who values peace more than power. The one who can walk away from what is loud and choose what is real. The slow rebuilding of a different kind of strength after the fall. He didn't rise quickly. This wasn't the triumphant comeback the movies sell you. It was quiet, messy, private. Healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in choosing not to text the person who hurt you again. It comes in waking up with anxiety and still going for a walk anyway. It comes in saying no when your old self would have said yes, just to be liked. It comes in moments that look small to the world, but feel monumental to your nervous system. That's how strength is rebuilt. Not with flexing, but with refusing to betray yourself again. And every time he kept a promise to himself, every time he walked away from chaos, every time he sat with discomfort instead of numbing it, he earned something no title could offer: clarity. Clarity over image the ye. Man who has depth doesn't dress for status. He dresses to feel like himself. He doesn't say yes to be agreeable. He says yes only when he means it, and no without apology. He doesn't surround himself with people who flatter him. He keeps company with those who sharpen him, because clarity has a cost. You lose the crowd, but you find your core. And when you have that, you no longer fear being alone, because you're no longer a stranger to yourself. You sit in your own presence and feel calm, not perfect, not finished, but at peace. And that to him is worth more than any spotlight ever offered. Depth that others feel. Before you even speak a word, before you speak, people already feel you. They feel your energy. They feel whether you're grounded or grasping. Whether you're holding something solid or just trying not to fall apart. And the man with depth, real depth, doesn't need to speak to be known. He doesn't need to justify himself. He doesn't need to introduce himself with accolades. He enters a room and the space shifts. Not because of charisma, but because of weight. Not heaviness in mood, but a quiet gravity in presence. He's not pulled by distraction. He's not dominated by impulse. He's not wearing a mask. He has returned to himself. And people feel it, especially those who have been waiting for someone safe enough to be real with. The body responds first. We often believe that connection is a matter of compatibility, of shared interest, of intellectual alignment. But beneath all of that, before our minds catch up, our bodies already know. Our nervous systems read one another, like ancient scripts. When she's near him, she doesn't feel the pressure to perform. She doesn't brace for impact. She doesn't instinctively protect herself from subtle manipulation or emotional instability. She simply feels calm. And that calm doesn't come from what he says. It comes from how little he needs to say. Because a man who has walked through his own fire, who has faced his guilt, his ego, his deepest insecurities, isn't afraid of hers. He doesn't project. He doesn't punish. He doesn't need to dominate to feel secure. And that makes him safe. Trust that has nothing to prove. Trust isn't just about consistency. It's about how you carry your own darkness. She trusts him not because he's perfect, but because he's honest about his imperfection. Because he's done the work of sitting with himself long enough to stop pretending. He no longer lashes out when he's insecure. He names it. He holds it. He takes responsibility for it. And that emotional maturity creates room. Room for softness. Room for vulnerability. Room for a kind of connection that can only grow when safety replaces performance. She senses that he won't use her openness against her. That he won't weaponize her emotions. That he won't disappear when things get messy, because he's already cleaned up his own mess, without expecting applause. The language of restraint. He doesn't say everything he knows. He doesn't need to. He doesn't correct to feel smart. He doesn't argue to win. He speaks with precision because he respects the power of words, because he remembers what it's like to be wounded by careless language. And so now, he chooses when to speak, when to pause, when to simply witness without needing to fix. That restraint isn't cold, it's warm. It's what allows others to unfold around him, because they know they're not being rushed, judged, or interpreted. They're just being held. That is depth, and you can't fake it. You can only become it. The cost of depth, and why it's always worth it. Let's be honest. Depth isn't free. You pay for it, with loss, with heartbreak, with long nights where you question your worth, your choices, your very identity. You pay for it when you walk away from people who once felt like home, because you've outgrown the version of yourself who built that home. You pay for it when you stop laughing at jokes that belittle others, when you stop saying yes just to keep the peace, when you stop chasing the applause of people whose values don't align with your own. And it's lonely sometimes, because the deeper you go, the smaller your circle becomes. You start to see the difference between connection and convenience, between loyalty and obligation, between love and attachment. And in that space, quiet, stripped, honest, you meet a version of yourself that was always waiting beneath the noise. A version that no longer needs the world's validation. Because he's found his own. You become the man you once searched for. There's a moment that comes, quietly, after all the falling, all the rebuilding, all the reflection. You look in the mirror one morning, no ceremony, no dramatic soundtrack, just silence, and you realize you've become the man you used to search for in others. The stable one, the grounded one, the one who knows how to listen, who knows how to stay, who knows when to walk away without bitterness, who can be soft without losing his strength, and strong without losing his soul. You are no longer chasing an identity, you are embodying one. And that is the power only time can give. When the world feels you before you speak. At this point in your journey, something subtle but profound begins to shift. People feel your energy before they hear your words. They listen more closely. Not because you're louder, but because you say less. They respect you, not for your power, but for your peace. You become a man of gravity, a man whose presence doesn't demand. It invites. A man who doesn't need to hold the room, because he holds himself. That, right there, is the invisible magnetism that only men who've walked through fire can carry. It's not taught. It's not forced. It's lived, and it changes everything. But here's the deeper truth. Before you arrive at this quiet, grounded power, you must first face the collapse. The moment life strips away what you thought made you valuable. The moment your title, your marriage, your confidence, all fall apart. It feels like the end, but it's not. It's the birth of the man you were always meant to become. In the next chapter, we'll walk into that collapse, into the storm, into the undoing of everything. Because only by breaking can you finally begin to build something true. Chapter 3. The collapse that creates you. He didn't see it coming, or maybe he did. But he ignored the signs. He told himself he could push through it, that it was just a rough patch, that real men endure. Until one day, he couldn't. The cracks became too loud to silence. The weight became too heavy to carry. The life he had built, so carefully, so publicly, collapsed. Not with one final blow, but piece by piece, moment by moment, until all that was left was rubble, and the silence that always follows ruin. The illusion of control for most of his adult life. He believed in control. He believed that if he planned well enough, worked hard enough, impressed the right people, stayed one step ahead, he could protect himself from chaos, from heartbreak, from loss, from failure. He had structure. He had systems. He had an identity he could point to and say, "This is me," until life said otherwise, until the phone call came, or the company folded, or the love he thought was forever said goodbye, or his health gave way, or his father died before he could say what needed to be said, or his child looked at him with disappointment in their eyes. Whatever it was, it shattered his illusion of control, and he was left staring at the wreckage. The hollowing out at first. There's numbness. He moves through the motions, drinks his coffee, answers emails, nods at small talk. But he feels like a ghost in his own life. Everything is the same, except he is not. The laughter feels hollow. The mirror feels distant. The things that once felt important don't, and underneath the numbness, fear, not just of the loss, but of what it means. Who is he now? Who is he? Without the job, the relationship, the body, the momentum? When the noise falls away, what remains? He's not sure, and that not knowing feels like drowning. The moment he finally stops running. There comes a night. It's not particularly special. No dramatic lightning. No rain pounding on the roof. Just a quiet moment in a quiet room when he can't distract himself anymore. He sits on the edge of the bed, or the floor, or in the driver's seat of a parked car. And everything inside him finally says, "I can't keep going like this." It's not weakness, it's truth, and it marks the beginning. Because that's the moment he stops pretending, stops performing, stops managing a life that no longer fits him. It's the moment he finally whispers, "I don't know who I am anymore." And for the first time, he means it. When everything familiar falls away, and what rises in the ashes. The next part is harder. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's invisible. There are no parades when a man loses who he thought he was. No applause for showing up to life when everything inside him wants to shut down. No one to document the mornings when he wakes up with dread in his chest, but gets out of bed anyway. The hardest part isn't the collapse itself. It's the empty days after, when the world keeps spinning, but he no longer knows his place in it. The friends he once related to now feel distant, The goals he once chased now feel hollow. The version of himself that once fit neatly into conversations, relationships, expectations, no longer exists. And yet, he's still here. In the ashes, alive, but unfamiliar to himself. This is the wilderness, this. Season has no map, no clear timeline, no fast-forward button. It's the wilderness. And in the wilderness, you learn to be honest, painfully honest. You learn to stop numbing, to stop curating, to stop performing healing, and actually do the work. This is where he starts to feel everything he buried. The shame, the regret, the mistakes he never admitted, the needs he pretended didn't exist. It all comes to the surface here. Not to punish him, but to free him. Because healing doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from finally letting it teach you. He begins to see what was never real, from the rubble. He begins to see what was false, all along. The approval he once chased was conditional. The relationship he once fought for was built on performance. The self-worth he once wore was stitched together from other people's expectations. And now he sees how much of his life was spent avoiding rejection, rather than living in truth. He sees how much energy went into managing an image. How many yeses were given out of fear. How many boundaries were violated. By others, and by himself. He doesn't judge the man he was. But he no longer wants to be him. And that decision, quiet, steady, resolute, becomes the first brick in the new foundation. The rebuilding doesn't start with action. It starts with surrender. He used to think rebuilding meant making a new plan, getting back in shape, fixing the resume, starting a new relationship. But not now. Now he knows rebuilding begins not with doing, but with letting go. Letting go of the timeline. Letting go of the pressure. Letting go of the idea that he must be something in order to be worthy. This isn't about constructing a better mask. It's about standing bare. No armor, no performance. And deciding to love himself anyway. That decision doesn't happen once. It happens daily. In small choices. In quiet moments. In choosing peace over proving. In choosing solitude over cheap company. In choosing silence over self-betrayal. The new code he begins to live by. Quiet commitments. That no one sees. There are no headlines. No transformation montages. No one clapping from the sidelines. But something powerful is happening. Each morning, he makes small choices that no one sees. He gets up even when the weight of the day feels like a boulder on his chest. He writes in his journal, not to impress anyone, but to hear his own voice again. He breathes, consciously, slowly, like it matters. Because now, it does. These aren't grand gestures. They are quiet vows. To not abandon himself again. To not betray what he knows in his gut to be true. Just to be accepted. To not let pain turn him cold. To not let failure define him. This is the new code he begins to live by. And though no one else may notice, he notices. And that's enough. Strength, without the costume, used to think strength meant never falling apart. Now he knows. Real strength is how you rebuild after you've already broken. It's in how you speak to yourself when no one's around. It's in how you treat others when you're tired, stressed, or hurting. It's in how you show up for your life, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. He no longer needs to play the part of the strong man. He is strong because he's soft enough to feel and steady enough to stay. That's the paradox. The strongest men he's ever met are the ones who don't perform masculinity. They simply live with integrity. They don't posture. They don't pretend. They don't need to dominate. They just are. Rooted, present, clear. And that's who he's becoming. The rise of discernment as his inner world stabilizes. Something else begins to sharpen. Discernment. He no longer entertains energy that drains him. He doesn't chase opportunities that pull him out of alignment. He doesn't say yes just to avoid conflict. Because he knows now. Every yes that violates his truth is a small betrayal. And he's done betraying himself. So he slows down. He thinks before he speaks. He chooses his company with care. He sets boundaries, not as walls, but as invitations for others to meet him with respect. And if they can't, he lets them go. Without rage, without guilt. Because the man who has rebuilt himself from the inside is no longer afraid of being alone. He begins to walk differently, not in the physical sense, but in the energetic sense. His steps have weight now. His words carry depth. His energy doesn't rise and fall with validation. It flows from something deeper, something earned. People don't always know how to name it, but they feel it. He's not trying to be high value. He's not trying to be stoic for show. He's not trying to be anything other than true. And that truth is a frequency, a vibration that resonates beyond appearances. It tells the world, I've faced myself. I've lost what I thought I couldn't live without. And I'm still here. More me than I've ever been. The birth of silent power. How collapse becomes authority. One morning, it's different. He doesn't wake up feeling completely healed. He doesn't leap out of bed with a new mission. But there's a quiet shift. Subtle, unmistakable. He's no longer afraid of the silence. He's no longer ashamed of his scars. No longer performing for an audience that was never really watching. There's no big declaration. Just a calm, grounded presence that starts to fill his body. Cell by cell, breath by breath. This is the birth of silent power. The kind that doesn't need to convince. The kind that no longer tries to prove. Because it's not based on who sees him. It's based on who he's become when no one was looking. Power that isn't loud. The world is obsessed with volume. Louder voices, bigger gestures, sharper images. But this man doesn't need to raise his voice. He doesn't need to announce his return. He's not back. He's new, wiser, quieter, stronger. He doesn't fight for his place anymore, because he's already taken ownership of himself. That's real power. And it doesn't look like what we were taught. It looks like calm in conflict. It looks like eye contact that doesn't waver. It looks like walking away without the need to punish. It looks like staying when every part of you once ran. It's not easy, but it's true. And that truth changes everything. The world begins to respond differently. Something unexpected begins to happen. People lean in. They listen more. They ask questions they didn't before. They seek his presence, not for entertainment, but for anchoring. He doesn't give advice unless asked. But when he speaks, people remember it. Because it comes from experience, not opinion. Because he no longer talks to be heard. He talks when he has something worth saying. This is how authority is born. Not by dominance, not by force, but by consistency. By becoming the kind of man others instinctively trust. Not because of his image, but because of his energy. What once broke him now grounds him. The same event that once shattered him, he now carries like a compass. Not as trauma, not as victimhood, but as wisdom. He doesn't need to rehash the past, but it lives in him. Not loudly, but faithfully. The betrayal taught him self-respect. The failure taught him strategy. The loss taught him presence. The silence taught him to listen. He doesn't glorify the pain, but he honors what it built. Because that collapse created him. Not the version people expected, but the version he was always meant to become. And now, he walks in rooms, not needing to be seen, but impossible to ignore. But power without direction is dangerous, and wisdom without purpose is wasted. So once a man has rebuilt himself, once he carries this silent power within, what does he do with it? In the next chapter, we explore how men over 40 use this newfound presence to lead, to love, and to live with intention. Without control, without ego, without games. Chapter 4. Leading without controlling. He never set out to be a leader. In fact, for a long time, he didn't want the responsibility. He saw how power could corrupt. He saw how ego could blind. He saw how many so-called leaders were just boys, in suits, clinging to control because they were terrified of chaos. He didn't want that. He didn't want to be followed out of fear or obeyed out of obligation. He didn't want to raise his voice to be heard. He didn't want authority if it meant he had to become someone he wasn't. But something shifted, and it wasn't loud. It was quiet, like most real changes are. One day he noticed that people were watching him, not for entertainment, but for direction. They were watching his calm. It started in small moments. At work, during a meeting that got tense, he stayed, grounded. In his family, when emotions flared, he listened first. With friends, when uncertainty rose, he didn't panic. He wasn't trying to lead. He was just being himself. Calm, clear, and steady. But in a world built on reactivity, stillness feels like strength, and others began to gravitate toward it. Not because he was the loudest, but because his energy felt safe. Because when everything felt unstable, he didn't flinch. And that became his influence. Not by command, but by example. Leadership through presence, not position. There's a lie the world sells. That leadership comes from position, from titles, from salaries, from being the boss. But real leadership? It has nothing to do with what's on your business card. It's how people feel when they're around you. Do they breathe easier? Do they feel more grounded? Do they speak more honestly? If yes, then you're leading, whether you realize it or not. Because presence is leadership. And the man over 40, who has faced himself, who has collapsed and rebuilt, carries presence like armor. Not to shield, but to anchor. He walks into rooms and doesn't need to assert himself, because people feel that he's already in command. Not of them, but of himself. And that is the kind of leadership no one teaches in school. His power doesn't demand. It invites. He doesn't bark orders. He asks questions. He doesn't correct with shame. He offers clarity with compassion, because he's no longer trying to control outcomes. He's committed to truth, not image. To progress, not perfection. To people, not just results. And those around him feel it. They open up. They relax. They step forward, because he's not forcing them. He doesn't push. He holds space, and in that space, people grow. That's leadership, the kind that empowers, not the kind that dominates. Father figures, mentors, and quiet pillars. How he leads in every role without needing credit. He's not the loudest in the room. He's not the center of attention. He's not trying to be the hero in anyone's story. But look closely, and you'll see how many stories he quietly holds up. In his presence, people breathe easier. They speak with more truth. They make better decisions. Not because he told them what to do, but because he reminded them of who they are. He leads not with direction, but with reflection. He doesn't shape others by controlling them. He shapes them by modeling something deeper. A man who knows himself. A man who doesn't need chaos to feel alive. A man who doesn't seek approval to feel worthy. That's what makes him a pillar. He's not flashy. He's foundational. The father energy that transcends biology. You don't need to have children to embody fatherhood. Father is not just a role. It's an energy. It's what makes others feel safe, seen, held, guided. And this man, who's walked through his fire, who's learned restraint, who's lived long enough to stop reacting, radiates father energy. Not the kind that lectures. The kind that listens, not the kind that commands. The kind that stays. He shows up, not with answers, but with presence. He teaches not by words, but by how he lives. He doesn't fix. He doesn't control. He doesn't rescue. He trusts others to rise, and creates the kind of space where they can. Mentorship. Without ego, he's become a mentor, though he never asked for it. Younger men find him, sometimes through work, sometimes through conversation, sometimes through silence. They're drawn not to his resume, but to his regulation, to the way he stays calm under pressure, to the way he doesn't react to criticism, to the way he doesn't need to win arguments. He doesn't try to impress them. That's why they're impressed. He tells them the truth. Not to be admired, but because someone once told him the truth. When he needed it most, he gives what he never got. Stable male presence. Consistent, thoughtful, slow. He teaches that being a man isn't about domination. It's about direction. Not leading the way, but walking with clarity. And in a world full of noise, that kind of clarity feels like peace. Why his leadership goes unnoticed, but never unfelt. He doesn't need credit. He doesn't need applause. He doesn't need his name on the banner or his face in the spotlight. Because he's moved beyond the phase of wanting to look like a leader. He simply leads by staying calm when others panic, by asking better questions instead of giving easy answers, by being a mirror so others can see themselves more clearly. People don't always thank him. Sometimes they don't even notice him. But weeks later, months later, they realize that moment changed me. That conversation stayed with me. That silence held something I didn't know I needed. That's his power. Not to dominate, but to impact quietly. Boundaries over control. How he protects what matters. Without ever raising his voice, control is a reaction. A grasp. A tightening. It often comes from fear. Of losing. Of being misunderstood. Of being vulnerable. He used to mistake control for strength. He thought being in charge meant making every decision, having every answer, managing every detail. But he learned through failure and fatigue that control is fragile. It cracks under pressure. It isolates. It burns out the people around you, and eventually it burns you out too. Now, he no longer controls. He creates boundaries, and boundaries are different. They don't push. They hold. They don't seek to dominate. They define. They are a quiet declaration. This is who I am. This is what I allow. This is what I protect. The power of quiet no. He doesn't scream no. He simply says it. Once. Clearly. Calmly. Without justification. And people feel the difference. It's not a rejection. It's not personal. It's not reactive. It's a reflection of his values. His energy. His inner peace. He's no longer afraid to disappoint others if it means staying aligned with himself. Because he's learned. Every time he says yes, when he means no, he slowly disappears. And he refuses to disappear again. So he says no, early. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. And the world begins to adjust around him. He protects his energy. Like a sacred resource in his younger years. He gave too much. He overextended. He overexplained. He overcommitted. Why? Because he thought love meant being available. That leadership meant being everything to everyone. That masculinity meant never saying, I'm overwhelmed. Now? He knows better. He protects his energy like a sacred resource. Not selfishly, but intentionally. He chooses where to invest. Who gets his time? What deserves his full attention? Not everyone does, and that's okay. Because the more he honors his energy, the more powerful his presence becomes. For the people, causes, and missions that truly matter. Respect without intimidation. People respect him. Not because they fear him, but because they feel him. They feel his steadiness, his self-possession, his unwillingness to participate in nonsense. He doesn't need to puff up his chest or control the room. He simply holds the space. He knows how to say, "That's not for me. Let me think about it. I won't be joining this conversation." And because he doesn't demand respect, he receives it. This is the paradox of leadership after 40. The more you release control, the more influence you actually hold. Not because of dominance, but because of discernment. From influence to impact, how he shapes the world without needing to be seen. He's no longer chasing attention. He's no longer trying to be the man. He no longer enters rooms with something to prove. He enters with something to offer. Not to impress, but to uplift. Not to dominate, but to stabilize. Not to control, but to create conditions where others can rise. That's the difference between influence and impact. Influence is how many people listen to you. Impact is what changes when you speak. He may not have millions of followers, but the people he loves feel safer when he's near. The people he leads feel clearer when he speaks. The world around him slows down, just enough to breathe, because he stopped rushing through it. That's real impact, and it doesn't require a platform, just presence. He measures his life differently now he no longer counts wins by numbers. He measures them in peace, in presence, in how often he shows up with his whole self. He values the conversation that leaves someone feeling seen over the argument he used to win. He values moments of connection over public recognition. He values alignment over applause. He values rest, not as a luxury, but as a strategy for longevity. He lives slower. He leads softer. He lasts longer. And that's what changes lives. Not because he tried to change anyone, but because he changed himself. And from that center, everything else shifted. He doesn't need to be the one. He just needs to be whole. Once upon a time, he thought leadership meant being the answer for everyone. Now he knows. He doesn't have to fix you. He doesn't have to impress you. He doesn't have to carry you. He just has to be himself. Fully, steadily, without apology. Because a man who is whole becomes a man who can be trusted, becomes a man who others lean on, becomes a man who quietly leaves every space better than he found it, without force, without noise, without needing a thank you. He leads by living the truth, not preaching it. But there's another kind of leadership. The kind that doesn't happen in public. The kind that unfolds in intimacy. How does a man like this love? What does it feel like to be in a relationship with someone who no longer needs to control, but chooses to stay, to see, to hold space for another? In the next chapter, we explore the quiet intimacy of men over 40, and why, for women who've outgrown boys, this kind of man feels like home. Chapter 5. How a Stoic Man Loves. He doesn't say, "I love you," easily. Not because he's emotionally distant, but because he knows what those words mean, and what they're often used to cover up. He's seen "I love you" used as manipulation, as apology, as an attempt to fix or to own. So now, when he says it, he means it, not as a declaration, but as a commitment. And long before the words are ever spoken, she feels it, in his presence, in his steadiness, in his ability to hold space for her emotions without trying to change them. That is how a Stoic man loves. He doesn't rush intimacy, he builds safety. He no longer rushes to be chosen. He doesn't chase affection or mistake intensity for connection. He knows that intimacy doesn't grow in urgency. It grows in safety. He becomes a safe place. Not perfect, but consistent. He doesn't pull her in with intensity, only to push her away when it gets real. He doesn't disappear when she's emotional. He doesn't get defensive when she needs to express herself. He listens, fully, with his whole body, without interrupting, without fixing, without flinching, because he's done the work of listening to himself. So now, he can listen to her, without losing himself in the process. Love, for him, is action, not performance. He doesn't perform romance. He doesn't show up with grand gestures that make for great stories, but empty relationships. He shows up in small ways, daily, quietly, intentionally. He remembers how she takes her coffee. He watches when she's overwhelmed and offers to take the weight without needing to be asked. He touches her gently, on the small of the back, on her cheek. Not to claim, but to connect. This isn't the love of youth, burning fast and disappearing at the first sign of discomfort. This is the love of a man who's been burned, and who now chooses to build a fire that warms, not one that consumes. His calm doesn't mean he doesn't care. Sometimes his silence is misunderstood. She wonders, is he angry? Is he bored? Does he feel anything at all? But what she slowly begins to understand is that his calm is not detachment. It's devotion, evolved. He doesn't react to every fluctuation. He doesn't match every wave of emotion. He stays rooted, not to avoid her, but to anchor her. And the more she leans into that stillness, the more she realizes he's not distant, he's deep, and his love, like the ocean, is felt most profoundly beneath the surface. He doesn't need to possess her. Why a Stoic man loves without controlling. He's not interested in owning anyone. In his younger years, he confused love with attachment. He thought closeness meant constant contact. He believed that needing someone was a sign of deep emotion. He mistook control for care. But time and heartbreak taught him otherwise. He's no longer threatened by her independence, her fire, her fullness. In fact, he respects it, because he knows that the kind of woman he wants to love, the kind that doesn't shrink herself, can't be controlled, and shouldn't be. So he doesn't try to contain her. He chooses her, again, and again, while letting her remain fully herself. That's not weakness. That's mature love. He honors her autonomy. He doesn't question her every move. He doesn't monitor her social life. He doesn't weaponize jealousy, or demand constant reassurance. Why? Because he's already built trust within himself. He doesn't project his insecurities onto her. He doesn't turn her freedom into a threat. He doesn't ask her to dim her light to make him more comfortable. He simply says, "I trust you. Not because I assume perfection, but because I trust myself enough to handle what's real." This kind of love is rare, because it asks nothing in return, except honesty. And when she feels it, when she knows she's free to choose him every day, not out of fear, but out of desire, she stays. Not because she has to, but because she wants to. He doesn't make her. His identity, he loves her deeply, but he doesn't lose himself in her. She doesn't become his project, his obsession, or his entire world. She becomes part of his life, a cherished, beautiful, meaningful part, but not the whole. Because he's already done the inner work. He's already found his purpose. He's already made peace with who he is, even without her. That's why. His love is strong, because it's not built on desperation. It's not dependent on keeping her close to feel whole. It's an offering, a sharing, a sacred connection between two sovereign people. Not a merging, not a blurring, not a sacrifice of selfhood, and in that clarity, she feels something rare. I'm not here to complete him. I'm here because I'm respected, desired, seen. He doesn't try to change her. He learns from her he used to date women and try to mold them into what he thought he needed. Correcting their habits, shaping their minds, critiquing their emotionality. Now, he listens. He learns. He lets her be his mirror, because he knows, if he's uncomfortable, there's a lesson there. Not necessarily about her, but about him. He sees relationship not as a place to fix someone, but as a sacred ground for personal evolution. That's what makes him powerful. Not because he leads with answers, but because he's humble enough to grow through love. Presence over performance. Why his love is felt. Even in silence, he doesn't shower her with constant declarations. He doesn't post public displays of affection to prove anything. He doesn't overpromise. But when she's with him, she knows. Not because he tells her every hour, but because his presence says it for him. He's there, fully, uninterrupted, undivided. No glancing at his phone. No half-listening while waiting to speak. No pretending to be interested just to keep the peace. When she speaks, he's present. When she's quiet, he's present. When she's breaking, doubting, retreating, he stays. With presence. And in a world that constantly demands attention, his stillness becomes the rarest form of love. He loves without noise, but never without depth. Some people love loudly. Others love conditionally. He loves quietly, but deeply. His love doesn't explode. It anchors. It doesn't chase dopamine. It builds safety. It doesn't thrive on drama. It seeks truth, even when it's hard, even when it means uncomfortable conversations, even when it requires him to examine his own shadow. She doesn't always hear big promises, but she feels the consistency. And that reliability, that's the new romance. He lets her breathe. Even when he misses her, he doesn't cling. Even when he aches. Even when he misses her scent, her laugh, the way her head fits perfectly in the curve of his shoulder. He still lets her have space. Not because he's detached, but because he honors the difference between love and possession. He knows that real connection doesn't need pressure to stay alive. It needs oxygen. So he lets her breathe. He lets her go into her world, her thoughts, her time alone, without guilt, without games. And when she returns to a man who never tried to hold her captive, only close. There is no guilt trip, no passive aggressiveness, no emotional withdrawal, only a quiet welcome back into a space that stayed open. His consistency becomes her safety. He doesn't disappear when things get hard. He doesn't lash out when he's misunderstood. He doesn't punish her with distance when he's hurt. Instead, he stays. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes with awkward words. Sometimes just sitting beside her when neither of them know what to say. But he's there. And the longer she's around him, the more she begins to relax. Not because he fixed her, but because he never asked her to be anything other than herself. That's when she realizes his love isn't a performance. It's a promise, made not just in words, but in how he chooses her. Daily. Love that doesn't break, and the kind of woman who's ready for it. His love doesn't rush, doesn't rise and fall with mood, doesn't depend on agreement. It holds. It remains. It breathes with her. She begins to realize something that startles her. He's not loving her for what she gives. He's loving her for who she is. Not for how well she performs. Not for how easy she makes his life. Not for how closely she fits his expectations. But for her essence, her presence, her being. And the more he continues to love her without needing to fix her, prove himself, or perform affection, the more she opens. Not because he asked her to, but because his steadiness made it safe. She's not afraid of being too much anymore. She used to hold back her thoughts, her needs, her opinions, her chaos. Why? Because she'd been told, directly or indirectly, that she was too much, too deep, too emotional, too loud, too complicated. But with him, she doesn't shrink. She expands, and he doesn't flinch. He doesn't try to silence her. He doesn't offer surface-level solutions. He doesn't treat her feelings like interruptions. He makes room, not because he's trying to impress her, but because that's who he is now. A man who knows that real love is not about containment, it's about capacity. Together they build something unshakable. What they build is quiet. It doesn't show up in highlight reels or viral posts. It's not flashy or filled with fireworks, but it's real. It's built on mutual respect, on deep listening, on space to evolve individually while staying connected collectively. They're not obsessed with being the perfect couple. They're focused on being honest companions. They let each other change. They grieve each other's old versions. They celebrate the new ones. And when conflict comes, as it always does, they don't run. They stay. Because staying now isn't rooted in fear. It's rooted in choice. And that kind of love doesn't break when life gets hard. It bends. It breathes. It holds. But not every woman is ready for this kind of love. Not every woman wants to be seen this deeply. Not every woman is ready to give up the drama, the games, the performance. So who is she? The one who stands across from this man, matching his depth, his presence, his pace. In the next chapter, we meet her. Chapter 6. The kind of woman a Stoic man waits for. She doesn't enter the room demanding attention. She doesn't need to. There's something about her that's different. Not louder. Not more beautiful in any obvious way. But deeper. She moves with self-respect. She listens more than she speaks. She doesn't compete. She simply is. And in a world where so many seek to be noticed, she becomes unforgettable precisely because she isn't trying. He notices her, not for how much she shines, but for how much she sees. And in her presence, something inside him settles. Not because she flatters him, but because she doesn't need anything from him, except the truth. She doesn't want a savior. She wants a mirror. She's done being rescued. Done waiting. Done pretending. She doesn't need a man to fix her. She's already done the work of sitting with her pain. She's faced her shame, her patterns, her shadows. She's walked alone long enough to know what she's made of. Now? She wants a mirror. A man who reflects back her strength, not her weakness. A man who doesn't try to solve her, but who honors her process. She doesn't want a script. She wants presence. She wants clarity. She wants real. And when she feels that in him, not as words, but as energy, she softens. Because she no longer has to guard herself. She matches stillness with depth. She doesn't confuse chaos with passion. She's had the roller coasters, the push and pull. The high highs followed by crashing lows, and she's over it. Now she craves peace. But not the kind that's dull or avoidant. The kind that's earned. The kind that's forged in honesty. In boundaries, in depth. When she meets a man who holds himself with quiet integrity, she doesn't test it. She meets it with her own. She doesn't play games. She doesn't poke for a reaction. She doesn't create drama just to feel alive. She shows up fully, emotionally awake, spiritually grounded. And that meeting? That moment where stillness meets depth? It's electric, but not unstable. It's alive, but rooted. She asks for nothing but honesty. She doesn't need him to be rich. She doesn't need him to be perfect. She doesn't need him to read her mind. She needs him to be real. To say what he means. To mean what he says. To own his story. Because she's owned hers. She's not interested in potential. She's not seduced by charm. She's not moved by attention. That lacks intention. She's moved by presence, by clarity, by emotional responsibility, because she brings all of that, and she won't settle for a man who doesn't. She's soft, not fragile, and strong without needing to prove it. There's a softness to her, but not the kind that breaks under pressure. Her softness is earned, refined, woven through experience. She's been through storms. She's faced betrayal, disappointment, loneliness. And still, she chose to stay open. Still, she chose not to become bitter. That's her strength. Not in how loud she is. Not in how many battles she wins. But in how deeply she feels. And how bravely she continues to love anyway. She doesn't raise her voice to be heard. She doesn't interrupt to be understood. She speaks with clarity. She listens with her whole body. She loves without possession. And that to him feels like water after years of wandering through fire. She doesn't follow. She walks beside. She doesn't need to be led. And she doesn't try to lead him. She simply walks beside. At her own pace, in her own rhythm, fully sovereign. And when they walk together, it's not a power struggle. It's not about who bends more. It's about alignment. He doesn't feel the need to protect her from everything, because she's already proven she can protect herself, and she doesn't need to be carried. But when she chooses to lean, it's not from weakness, it's from trust. Because for the first time in a long time, she doesn't have to do it all alone. And neither does he. She's not afraid of his silence. Other women used to misunderstand him. His pauses, his calm, his tendency to observe more than react. They thought he was withholding, or cold, or emotionally distant. But she meets his silence with understanding, not fear, because she's not addicted to noise. She doesn't need constant reassurance. She doesn't see depth as danger. She sees it as invitation. She knows there's something sacred in the stillness, and she doesn't rush to fill it. Instead, she leans in. She waits. She trusts what's unfolding without pushing it. And in that quiet, something rare blooms. Two people not trying to fix each other, just learning how to witness each other more deeply. She doesn't need to be chosen. She chooses. She's not trying to be picked. She's not performing. She's not shape-shifting. She's not exhausting herself trying to be enough. She already is, and she knows it. So she doesn't chase. She doesn't prove. She doesn't ask, "What do you want me to be?" Instead, she asks, "Is this love honest? Is this connection mutual? Do we bring peace to each other's nervous systems?" And if the answer is no, she leaves. Not with bitterness, not with drama, but with grace. Because she's not here to earn love. She's here to share it, and that alone makes her unforgettable. Her stillness awakens his. Why she doesn't need to fight to be felt, she doesn't raise her voice to prove her point. She doesn't beg to be seen. She doesn't push for attention. And yet, he notices everything. The way she enters a room, aware, not self-conscious. The way she speaks, clear, not sharp. The way she listens, fully, not politely. There's a presence to her, a calm intensity that doesn't compete. It simply exists. And in her stillness, he feels himself slowing down, breathing deeper, thinking more clearly, feeling more fully. Not because she demands it, but because her energy makes it safe to return to his own. She's not trying to heal him. She trusts he's done his work. She's not here to be his therapist, or his mother, or his emotional manager. She doesn't take on his healing as her mission. Why? Because she's done her own work, and she knows how sacred that process is. She knows no one can do it for you. No one can walk into your shadow and come out with your clarity. So she doesn't rescue. She respects, and that changes everything. Because now, he doesn't feel judged. He doesn't feel examined. He doesn't feel worked on. He feels met. And for a man who has spent years trying to prove, perform, and protect, that kind of meeting is disarming and profoundly healing. She doesn't need to be right. She wants to be real. She values truth more than pride, connection more than control, clarity more than cleverness. In disagreement, she doesn't attack. She stays. She breathes. She listens. Not to win, but to understand. She doesn't weaponize his vulnerability. She doesn't keep emotional score. She doesn't shame him for not knowing everything. Instead, she invites honesty. And when emotions rise, as they sometimes do, she doesn't escalate. She remains, not passive, but grounded. Because for her, love isn't about being in power. It's about being in partnership, and that steadiness allows him to show more of himself, without fear of collapse. Her peace isn't the absence of fire. It's fire under control. Don't mistake her calm for lack of depth. She feels deeply. She thinks sharply. She burns with desire, creativity, vision. But she doesn't leak. She contains, not by suppressing, but by mastering. Her emotions aren't chaotic. They're intelligent. Her fire isn't destructive. It's directed. And when she loves, she does so fiercely, but without possession. She is not afraid to let a man be free, because she knows the man who truly values freedom will never misuse it. The moment they recognize each other, and why, this is the relationship that doesn't need rescue. It's not a lightning bolt. It's not a grand cinematic moment. It's not a whirlwind of instant blinding chemistry. It's quieter. It's a stillness in his chest when she speaks. It's the safety in her eyes when he doesn't have the answer. It's the way the air between them doesn't demand performance, only presence. They recognize each other, not because they complete one another, but because they mirror one another. They've both done the work. They've both walked through their own fires. They've both spent years becoming the kind of person they once searched for. So now, they don't need to fix. They don't need to prove. They don't need to rescue. They simply relate. Two sovereign beings, two steady flames. Not consuming, just burning beside each other in rhythm. They don't need each other. They choose each other. This is not a relationship built on fear, not on scarcity, not on loneliness. It's built on choice. Every day they wake up and choose. To listen, to stay, to soften, to grow they don't punish each other with silence. They don't weaponize vulnerability. They don't mistake independence for rejection. Instead, they celebrate it. Because in this kind of love, freedom isn't the threat. It's the foundation. And intimacy, it's no longer about merging. It's about witnessing. And in that witnessing, they find something no younger, noisier love ever gave them. Peace. But love, true love, isn't just about what happens between two people. It's about how those two people walk into the world together. So what happens when a stoic man and a sovereign woman begin to move through life as a unit? What does their partnership create? In work, in family, in society? How do they lead, not just each other, but the world around them, without needing a stage? That's what we explore next. Chapter 7. When two pillars walk together, they don't orbit each other. They don't lose themselves in romance. Don't disappear into each other's shadows. Don't ask the other to carry what they haven't healed. They walk side by side. Two pillars. Two full-rooted beings, and the space between them. It's not filled with clinging or control. It's filled with co-creation. They don't need each other to feel whole. But when they come together, they amplify everything around. They don't complete one another. They expand one another. She doesn't make him better. He doesn't fix her. Instead, they reveal one another. His clarity sharpens her voice. Her intuition deepens his direction. When they speak, it's not about who's right. It's about what's real. When they disagree, it's not a battlefield. It's a bridge. They ask better questions. They listen longer. They leave space for silence. Because silence is where truth often lives. And in that space, they both expand. Not for each other, but beside each other. Their union doesn't consume. It builds. They don't isolate from the world to stay safe. In their love, they move outward. They take their stability and pour it into their children, into their work, into their communities. Not because they feel obligated, but because their connection gives them the strength to give more. They aren't running from chaos. They've learned how to hold it. And now they help others do the same. Their relationship becomes a sanctuary, yes, but it also becomes a launch pad. It doesn't keep them small. It elevates them both. And everyone who comes near them feels the difference. They don't chase power. They radiate influence. They're not flashy. They don't need recognition. They don't dominate conversations or fill rooms with noise. But people remember them, because together they move differently. Grounded, aligned, calm in crisis, alive in stillness. They don't make people feel inferior. They make people feel invited. Invited to slow down, to speak honestly, to show up as their full selves, without the performance. This isn't about charisma. It's about coherence. They live what they speak. They model what others only talk about. And in doing so, they lead. Effortlessly, powerfully, quietly. What they build together. Love as a legacy. Not a performance. Their love is not a show. It's not curated for approval. It's not filtered through social media, applause, or hashtags. Their love builds. Brick by brick. Boundary by boundary. Morning by morning. They don't wake up to impress each other. They wake up to support each other. To check in. To course correct. To ask, how can I meet you better today? They build not only a life, but a way of being. And slowly, quietly, that way becomes a kind of legacy. Their relationship becomes a living example. Others watch them, not because they're perfect, but because they're present. There are no theatrics, no power games, no martyrdom disguised as love. They don't pretend to have it all figured out, but they model something rare. Love without ego, support without sacrifice, intimacy without enmeshment. Friends begin to ask different questions. Around them, children feel safer in their presence. Younger couples observe their calm, not with envy, but with hope. Because what these two have, it's possible, it's real, it's earned. They don't avoid the hard conversations. They talk about money, openly. They talk about roles, responsibilities, rhythms, without blame. They talk about past wounds, not to reopen them, but to make sure they don't bleed on each other. They're not afraid to say, "That hurt me. I'm scared. I need space. I was wrong." And when those moments come, they don't weaponize vulnerability. They honor it because they know this is the work. Not the flowers, not the dates, not the shared playlists. This, the willingness to sit across from one another and not look away, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges identity, even when it asks them to evolve. They don't fear that kind of growth. They expect it. They're builders, not escapists. They don't use each other to escape life. They use their love to face it. Together they plan with intention. They parent with patience. They rest without guilt. They contribute without depletion. They don't play the tired roles of fixer and rescued. They walk into the world as partners. Aligned in values, shared in vision. Different in style, but united in soul. And in a world obsessed with shortcuts and spectacle. They are a long, slow fire, one that warms everyone they touch. How they move through the world. Quiet power, shared purpose. They don't walk ahead of each other. They don't walk behind. They walk together. And when they enter a space, they don't command it. They calibrate it. Without trying, they make people lower their voices, open their hearts, pause before speaking, because something about them, together, says, "This is sacred ground." Speak with intention. Act with care. Their power isn't loud. It's felt. It doesn't dominate. It dignifies. Their partnership doesn't end at the door. They don't leave their relationship at home. It follows them in how they lead, in how they hire, in how they listen to others, in how they design, write, build, teach. Their love isn't a separate life. It's the foundation beneath every room they walk into. You see it in the way they make decisions. Slow, deliberate, principled. in the way they defer to one another, not out of hierarchy, but out of trust. In how they show up for people, without savior complex, but with radical presence. People feel safer around them, because together, they exude integrity. And integrity is magnetic. They lead without needing to be leaders. They don't seek status. They don't crave followers. They don't need a podium to be heard. They lead by how they live. And it's not always visible. Sometimes it's how they treat the server at a restaurant, how they handle miscommunication with grace, how they let others speak without interruption. Sometimes it's how they disagree, with respect, not reactivity, with curiosity, not control. Sometimes it's how they exit spaces that no longer honor their peace, without drama, without insult, without apology. Their lives become quiet permission, slips for others to do the same. Their influence ripples, quietly but widely. They may never know how many people they've touched, how many friends reevaluated their relationships after spending an evening at their home, how many children learned what love feels like just by watching them cook together, how many co-workers softened because someone finally modeled calm under pressure. They're not chasing legacy, but they're leaving one. Not in books, not on stages, not in plaques or awards, but in nervous systems regulated, in hearts soothed, in truths spoken that otherwise might have stayed buried. That's their way, not explosive, but enduring, when love becomes leadership and the quiet revolution it creates. At some point, their love becomes bigger than them. It stops being just a private connection. It becomes a quiet force in the world. Not a performance, not a sermon, just way of being, and people around them notice. Not because they boast, not because they brand it, but because people feel better around them. More honest, more hopeful, more grounded. That's what leadership looks like, when it's born from love, not ego. It doesn't shout, it doesn't coerce, it doesn't center. It's self. It serves. And in a world starving for realness, their union becomes a subtle, sacred revolution. They don't chase a future, they create one. They're not rushing toward milestones. Not measuring success by rings or real estate or matching travel photos. They're asking better questions. What are we building that lasts beyond us? What values will this love leave behind? How do we move through conflict without losing connection? How do we stay soft, even when life gets hard? Their relationship is less about what they can get from each other, and more about what they can give the world, together. That giving might be a business, a family, mentorship circle, a quiet home filled with books, music, and conversations that change lives. Whatever it is, it's theirs. Not because it was handed to them, but because they built it, moment by moment, without burning out, without betraying themselves, without giving in to noise. They know they can walk alone, but they no longer have to. This is perhaps the most powerful thing of all. Neither of them needs the other to survive. They've both known loneliness, They've both walked through seasons of healing alone. They've both proven, individually, that they can carry their own weight. But now they choose to walk together. Not out of fear, not out of habit, but out of deep alignment. And that makes all the difference. Because when you've tasted solitude and survived it, you love differently. You don't cling. You don't control. You simply walk forward, together. In purpose, in peace, in quiet, grounded power. But not every season is shared. There are moments when even the strongest men walk alone. Not because they failed in love, but because life, at times, calls them inward. Calls them into solitude. Calls them to remember who they are without any reflection at all. In the next chapter, we enter that sacred space, the solitude of a grounded man. Not loneliness, but silence, stillness, and the kind of strength that only grows in the quiet. Chapter 8. Solitude isn't loneliness. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. He knows that now, because he's lived both. He's sat in crowded rooms feeling invisible. He's laid in bed next to someone who didn't really see him. He's performed strength while breaking inside. That was loneliness. But solitude is different. Solitude is chosen. Solitude is sacred. Solitude is the place he returns to, not to escape the world, but to remember who he is within it. He no longer fears his own company. There was a time when silence scared him. He filled it with noise, scrolling, streaming, dating, working, drinking, talking just to avoid thinking. Because when the world got quiet, he had to face the one voice he had spent years avoiding. His own. But now he welcomes it. He walks without headphones. He eats in stillness. He sits on park benches and listens to wind instead of podcasts. He lets his mind wander, without grabbing for a distraction. Because he's no longer afraid of himself. He's come home. This is where clarity finds him. He doesn't chase clarity anymore. He makes room for it. And clarity doesn't always show up loud. It whispers. In the middle of a walk at dusk. In the pause between breaths. In the space between thoughts. It tells him what to let go of. What to forgive. What to pursue next. Not for applause, but for alignment. He doesn't need advice columns or motivational reels. He just needs to slow down enough to hear what his soul has been trying to say. Solitude is the volume knob for intuition. And now, he's finally listening. He's not isolating. He's refining. Isolation is born of pain. Solitude is born of peace. In solitude, he doesn't disappear. He refines. He gets sharper, more discerning, more aligned with his values. He says no, faster, without guilt. He moves slower, without apology. He releases people, habits, ideas that once fit a version of him he no longer is. And what remains? What's essential? The friendships that nourish, the routines that center, the choices that align. In solitude, he sheds what was never his, and rediscovers what always was. He doesn't need to be seen to be whole. The power of quiet completion. He's no longer obsessed with visibility. In his younger years, he craved recognition. The like, the text back, the praise, the confirmation that he mattered. He wanted to be chosen, not just by a woman, but by the world. But now he understands. You don't need to be seen to be complete. You just need to see yourself clearly. So he shows up, fully, quietly, not for approval, but because it honors who he is. His actions aren't signals. They're standards. His consistency isn't for applause. It's for alignment. He's not waiting anymore. He's done waiting. Waiting for the right time. The perfect invitation. The next relationship to feel worthy. The next achievement to feel ready. Now, he wakes up and moves. Even if no one is watching. Even if no one understands. He writes. He trains. He creates. He reflects. He builds. Not because anyone told him to. Not because it guarantees an outcome. But because showing up for himself is the outcome. That discipline, that sacred self-commitment, is what makes him magnetic. Not the result, but the ritual. He has nothing to prove, but plenty to give. He's let go of proving. He's no longer performing for attention. He's no longer arguing to be right. He's no longer climbing ladders that lead nowhere. But that doesn't make him passive. It makes him powerful. Because now, he gives without agenda. He shares his wisdom without needing validation. He helps without keeping score. He leads without needing a title. He doesn't need to be the loudest man in the room. He just needs to be the most grounded. And people feel it. They don't always know why they trust him. But they do. Because a man at peace with himself becomes a refuge for others. His silence is a source of strength. Some confuse silence with emptiness, with lack, with indifference. But his silence? It's full. Full of thought, full of care, full of restraint. He doesn't interrupt to show he's intelligent. He doesn't fill pauses to avoid discomfort. He lets things breathe. Because he's not afraid of what's underneath. He's already gone there, within himself. And because of that, you can sit next to him and feel more whole without him saying a word. That's presence. That's depth. That's what only solitude can teach. In the stillness, he reclaims his mission and the power of a man who moves alone. There's something sacred about the way he walks now. No entourage, no noise, no rush. He moves differently, not because the world slowed down, but because he did. And in that slowing, he heard something most men never do. His true calling. Not what others expected. Not what culture rewarded. Not what past versions of himself once desired. But the real work he's here to do. Work that aligns. That nourishes. That doesn't drain him. Even when it exhausts him. And it was in solitude. Not in a boardroom. Not on a stage. That this clarity finally came. He doesn't need permission anymore. He used to wait. Wait for signs. Wait for approval. Wait for guarantees. Now, he initiates. He writes the book, starts the project, says what needs to be said, goes where his soul is pulled. Not recklessly, but with quiet resolve. He doesn't need to be told he's ready, because he knows he is. And if he's wrong, he adjusts. Not with shame, but with strength. Because a man who's met himself in solitude trusts his own inner compass more than external praise. He's not trying to lead the world, just walk in truth. He's not on a conquest. He's not trying to be the next big thing. He's not branding his integrity or monetizing his wisdom. He's just living in alignment. And that alignment? It radiates. People feel it in how he listens, in how he sets boundaries, in how he makes decisions that might not be popular, but are rooted in principle. He's not trying to gather followers. He's focused on not losing himself. And that's what makes him magnetic. He's not moving for attention. He's moving in truth. He walks alone. But never against solitude doesn't make him combative. It makes him clear. He's not against the world. He just doesn't need to belong to all of it. He doesn't attack what he disagrees with. He simply redirects his energy toward what matters. He's less reactive now, more precise, more economical with time, words, attention. And in that economy, there's elegance. He doesn't waste effort on impressing. He pours it into impacting. Even if no one claps, even if no one sees. Because he's not doing it to be admired. He's doing it because it's who he's become. The strength of a man at peace. And why? That's what the world needs most. He no longer walks into rooms needing to be understood. He no longer argues to be right. He no longer explains his worth. He embodies it. He is at peace. And that peace isn't passive. It's powerful. It's the kind of power that doesn't tremble when provoked. That doesn't rush when delayed. That doesn't shatter when ignored. Because he's no longer built on approval. He's built on presence. Presence that was forged in silence, in still mornings, in hard truths faced alone, in deep breaths taken before responding. Presence that cannot be taught, only earned. People don't know why they trust him, but they do. They come to him, not always for answers, but for anchoring. He doesn't preach. He doesn't position himself as superior. He simply is. And that isness, that quiet clarity, creates space for others to soften, to speak, to become more honest versions of themselves. Because when you're near someone who doesn't need to dominate, you begin to remember you don't need to perform. That's his gift. Not charisma, not volume, but calm, grounded, earned peace. And in a world of noise, that's the loudest thing of all. His power isn't reactive. It's rooted. Doesn't panic when things go wrong. He doesn't over-celebrate when things go right. He lives in rhythm, in cycles, in trust. He plants, he waters, he waits. He shows up day after day, even when no one's watching, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely. Because the man, he is becoming matters more than the comfort he must give up. And in that devotion, in that discipline, he becomes dangerously clear. Not to others, to himself. And that kind of man? You can't manipulate him. You can't rush him. You can't distract him. You can only do one thing: respect him. But this kind of man isn't built overnight, and he's not born this way. He's shaped, slowly, by choices, by mistakes, by the relentless courage it takes to stay awake in a world that numbs. In the next chapter, we go back. We trace the inner transformation, the turning points that split a man into before and after. Because power without, story is hollow, and the silent strength of a man over 40 always carries a past that no one else saw him survive. Chapter 9. The turning point didn't feel like a breakthrough. It felt like a breakdown. He didn't wake up one morning with clarity. He fell hard into silence, into shame, into the deep ache of realizing, I don't even recognize myself anymore. From the outside, things may have looked fine. The job, the house, the handshake smile, the functioning habits. But inside, he was fractured, and it took losing something, or someone, to finally face it. The moment the mask cracks, there's always a moment, a sentence, a silence, a betrayal, a diagnosis, a night when he couldn't stop shaking, a morning when he couldn't get out of bed. That moment may have gone unnoticed by others, but for him, it was the split, the line between before and after. Before, performing, strength. After, learning real strength. Before, chasing admiration. After, questioning why he needed it at all. Before, moving fast. After, learning how to stop. That crack in the mask didn't ruin him. It revealed him. He realized he was living someone else's life. It hit him slowly. Maybe it started with frustration, then numbness, then a sense of quiet dread every time he walked into the life he built. At some point, the truth became unbearable. I built this for them, not for me. He took the job because it was expected. He stayed in the relationship because it looked stable. He wore the role of dependable man like armor, until it became a cage, and he hated himself for resenting it, because everyone else called it success. But deep down, he knew it wasn't his life. It was a costume, and he was suffocating in it. The collapse was a kind of rescue. He didn't know it at the time. He thought he was failing, losing, falling apart. But now, looking back, it was the only thing that could have saved him. The breakup, the bankruptcy, the breakdown, the burnout. It stripped him bare, took what he clung to, left him with nothing but the raw material of his truth. It felt cruel, but it was sacred, because in that space, between what shattered and what could begin, he finally asked the only question that mattered. What's left, when there's nothing left to pretend? And in that silence, He started again. The man who walked out of the fire. Not burned but reforged pain didn't purify him. It introduced him to the parts of himself he had long ignored. The fear he masked with ambition. The loneliness he drowned in distraction. The rage he swallowed in the name of peace. At first he hated what he saw. He flinched. He denied. He blamed. But the pain was patient, and it wouldn't let him escape this time. So, slowly, he stayed. He sat with his shadow. He faced the echoes. He reread old journal entries he once tossed aside. He apologized, not to the world, but to himself. Because now he saw it clearly. He didn't just break. He was broken open. Fire doesn't just destroy. It refines the fire stripped away his illusions, his false identities, his borrowed dreams. And in that stripping, something unexpected remained. Truth, the real voice inside. The quiet knowing. The buried instinct that had whispered all along. There's more to you than this. He used to see pain as a threat. Now he sees it as an alchemist. It didn't make him bitter. It made him precise. It burned off what was false, so what was essential could finally be shaped. Not quickly, not perfectly, but thoroughly. He rebuilt differently. This time he didn't rebuild to impress. He didn't rush to reinvent. He didn't post his comeback on social media. He rebuilt in silence, in private. In mornings no one documented. He started with small things. Waking early without panic. Cooking without noise. Looking in the mirror without judgment. Telling the truth in rooms that didn't reward it. He asked himself better questions. What feels real? What drains me? What version of me am I finally done with? And brick by brick he began building a life that fit, not perfectly, but authentically. A life that wouldn't need to be escaped from. He didn't become someone else. He became who he was meant to be. The turning point wasn't about transformation. It was about recovery. He didn't become someone better. He became someone truer, less shiny, less agreeable, less afraid of being misunderstood. But also, more still, more kind, more rooted in something real. And this version of him? It may not be for everyone, but it doesn't need to be. Because the man who walked through fire faced himself and chose to rebuild with honesty. That man doesn't chase belonging. He creates it. The life that waited on the other side, quiet, aligned, and unapologetically his. It didn't look like much from the outside. No big wins. No shiny new identity. No dramatic before and after transformation. Just a man, rising early, living, slow, moving with intention. He wasn't chasing success. He was defining it. By his own standards, for the first time in his life. And those standards were different now. Peace over noise. Presence over validation. Clarity over comfort. He stopped caring what others thought he should be. And in doing so, he became someone undeniably himself. His days became ritual, not escape. He used to run, from job to job, from woman to woman, from silence to noise. Now, he walks. Slowly, deliberately, with reverence. Each morning became a return to the breath, to the body, to the ground beneath his feet. He no longer needs caffeine to feel alive. He no longer checks his phone before checking in with himself. He no longer crams his schedule to avoid stillness. Instead, he invites it. Because stillness, once terrifying, has become the place where truth visits most often. His relationships got smaller, but deeper. He doesn't have as many people in his life anymore. But the ones who remain? They're real. No more half-friendships built on old habits. No more energy drains masked as obligation. No more conversations that leave him feeling less seen than before they began. Now, he chooses depth over proximity. He speaks less, but with more weight. He listens more, but with better boundaries. He doesn't overshare to feel understood. He lets silence speak when words would only clutter. And in that shift, something beautiful happened. He stopped needing to be liked, because now he's loved for who he really is, not for who he performed. He started creating without asking. For permission, he always had ideas, visions, things he wanted to build. But fear kept him waiting. For approval, for signs, for certainty. Not anymore. Now he creates. In silence. In discipline. Without needing it to go viral. Without needing it to impress anyone. Because creation for him now is not a product. It's a practice. A form of devotion. A conversation with the part of him that never needed to be famous. Just faithful. And for the first time, he feels in alignment, not just with what he does, but with who he is becoming. He's not afraid to begin again, and why that makes him unstoppable. He lost things he thought he couldn't live without. And still, he's breathing, still rising, still walking. That changed him. Because once a man realizes he can lose everything, and still find himself on the other side, he becomes dangerous. Not in the way of harm, but in the way of unshakable clarity. He's no longer terrified of change, no longer paralyzed by the unknown, no longer stuck in cycles just because they're familiar. If he has to start over, he will, with less baggage, with more wisdom, with the kind of peace that doesn't need permission to move forward. His confidence isn't loud anymore. He used to fake confidence, through posture, through charm, through knowing all the answers. Now, his confidence is quieter, but far more real. It lives in his eyes, in the pause before he speaks, in the calm with which he says, "I don't know yet," or "That's not for me," or even, "I've changed my mind," because he's no longer married to image. He's committed to truth. And that truth may evolve, but it will never be compromised. That's who he is now. A man who doesn't need to be impressive, just in integrity. He doesn't need to be the hero. He just needs to show up. He's not trying to save the world. He's not trying to fix people. He's not trying to be worshipped. He's simply showing up. Present. Steady. Available to the moment in front of him. He offers what he can. He steps back when needed. He apologizes when wrong. He holds space when words would fail. This is what masculinity looks like. When it's been humbled, healed, and reclaimed. Not flashy, but faithful. Not performative, but transformational. He doesn't talk much about what he's become. He doesn't need to, because everywhere he goes, he leaves something better behind. Not because he forced it, but because he became someone who carries peace like gravity. And now in the final chapter, we explore exactly that. The mark he leaves behind. Not in books, not in titles, not in followers, but in the lives, the rooms, the hearts, that remember he was there. Chapter 10. The Legacy of Stillness. He never chased legacy. That was never the goal. When he was younger, he thought legacy meant big things. Books, buildings, names carved in granite, success stories told by others long after he was gone. But now, he understands something deeper. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's how people feel when you're gone. And more importantly, it's what remains alive in them because you once stood beside them in silence and didn't flinch. He didn't teach loudly, but people learned. Anyway, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He didn't try to be a guru, a leader, or a sage. But people watched him. They noticed how he handled disrespect without becoming cruel, how he set boundaries without building walls, how he stayed calm when chaos arrived. And slowly, people changed around him. Not because he demanded it, but because he modeled it. They began to pause more, to listen more deeply, to question what strength actually looks like. His stillness became a mirror. And that mirror? It showed people who they were capable of becoming. He gave people back to themselves. He didn't need to impress. So others felt safe dropping their own performance. He didn't need to control. So others found freedom in his presence. He didn't need constant validation. So others stopped seeking it too. In conversations, in brief moments, in passing glances, he gave people back to themselves, not by force, not by fixing, but by reminding them, through the way he was, that it's possible to be whole without pretending. And that is a kind of legacy no biography could capture. His impact wasn't measured, but it was felt. No spreadsheet tracked his influence. No headline documented his depth. But decades from now, someone will raise a child with more patience because of how he once listened to them. Someone will speak a truth they were once afraid to say because of how he once held their silence. Someone will refuse to abandon themselves in a relationship because he showed them that love and freedom can coexist. And none of these people will say his name. But they will carry him, not in memory, in energy, in how they now walk through the world. The invisible monument. Why some men are remembered without ever needing to be known. He won't have buildings named after him. There won't be viral quotes, branded hashtags, or annual awards. But somewhere, someone will whisper, "He changed me." I never forgot what he said that day. I was different after being in his presence. Not because he was famous, but because he was available. Available to the moment, to the truth, to you. And when you stood near him, you felt like the world slowed down for a second. Like something heavy and you could finally exhale. Not because he said anything special, but because he wasn't performing. He was simply there. Fully, quietly, human. And that, in this age of distraction, is unforgettable. He didn't leave a brand. He left a standard. He didn't build a following. He built a framework for how to be. Still without being passive. Strong without being loud. Loving without losing yourself. Honest without being cruel. People won't always remember his name, but they'll hold themselves to the bar he embodied. They'll pause before reacting. They'll soften where they once attacked. They'll protect their peace, because they once saw what peace looked like. That's his monument, not in marble. In men and women who now move differently because he once walked among them. His greatness wasn't in volume, but in precision. He didn't say much, but when he spoke, people listened, because he didn't speak to fill silence. He spoke when the eye-off silence had delivered something worth saying. He didn't mentor crowds. He impacted individuals, one moment at a time, one conversation at a time, one choice at a time. He gave attention like currency, rare, intentional, without condition. And those who received it, they never forgot how rich it made them feel. Not in ego, in dignity. That's the gift of a man who doesn't waste words. His silence means something. So when he does speak, the world leans in. He was the quiet in the room that changed everything. He never demanded space, but space opened for him. He didn't interrupt, yet people stopped speaking when he inhaled. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because something in him said, "This moment matters. Let's treat it that way." And even when he left the room remembered him. In how the pace slowed. In how the tone softened. In how people left feeling more honest than when they arrived. He didn't change the world. He changed rooms. And in doing so, he quietly changed lives. The men he touched, and why they now carry the fire. Forward, he didn't build an army. He didn't start a movement. He simply lived with integrity. And other men noticed. They noticed how he didn't flinch under pressure. How he apologized, without shrinking. How he chose principle over popularity. And something inside them whispered, "That's possible?" I didn't know a man could move like that. Maybe I don't have to fake it either. He didn't hand out blueprints, but he handed out permission. To be honest, to be steady, to be human. They didn't always thank him, but they remembered him. Most never said it. They didn't have the words. Didn't know how to express what it meant. But they remembered. The time he didn't mock their fear. The time he held eye contact when they admitted shame. The way he said, That's okay, brother. Keep going. Those moments etch themselves deeper than advice ever could. Because in those moments, they weren't being fixed. They were being seen. And for men who had been taught all their lives to hide, that seeing was revolutionary. He changed masculinity. Without trying to redefine it, he didn't give lectures about manhood. He didn't write essays about masculinity. He embodied something different. He showed that strength could be gentle, that leadership could be quiet, that presence could be more powerful than performance. And in doing so, he gave other men something rarer than direction. A living example. Not the kind who told them how to be, but the kind who gave them space to become. And one by one, those men began to soften, to sharpen, to lead differently, because of how he lived. His fire was contained, but contagious. He didn't hype men up. He calmed them down. He didn't yell, "Be stronger." He whispered, "You're already enough. Now act like it." And from that whisper came wildfire. Because once a man touches real stillness, he can never unfeel it. He may go back to noise, to the mask, to the rush. But somewhere in him that fire remains. And when he's ready, he returns to it. Not to copy the first man, but to carry what he carried. A kind of grounded power that spreads without needing to be seen. The final echo. How a quiet man leaves a loud legacy without saying goodbye. He didn't make a grand exit. No farewell speech, no final post, no curated closing chapter. He simply kept showing up, fully, faithfully, until one day, he wasn't there. And only then did people realize, something's missing. There was more peace when he was around. There was more honesty when he was listening. There was more strength in me when he stood beside me. And that's the thing about real legacies. They don't announce themselves. They echo. In tone, in rhythm, in how others now move differently, long after you're gone. He didn't need to be remembered to have mattered. He didn't build to be remembered. He built to be true. And in being true, he gave something eternal to the people he touched. Permission to live without armor. A woman loved more deeply because he never asked her to shrink. A son breathed easier because he saw what manhood could feel like. A friend dared to be honest because he knew someone could hold his truth. And even strangers, people who never knew his name, carried a trace of him in how they slowed their speech, in how they chose integrity, in how they decided that day, I'll be present instead of impressive. His absence became a presence. When he was gone, he wasn't gone. Because what he gave didn't fade. It folded into others. The stillness, the steadiness. The way he looked someone in the eye and made them believe they mattered. That didn't leave with him. It planted itself. And from those seeds, other men rose. Other women softened. Other children watched in wonder. Not because he shouted, but because he once stood still. And it moved the world. What remains? Now not titles, not trophies, not noise. What remains is a kind of weight in the soul. A knowing, a feeling that will never quite be explained, but will always be remembered. Because somewhere, once, a man chose stillness over show, depth over dominance, presence over performance. And because he did, we all now know what's possible. This is the silent power of men over 40. Not the noise they make, but the ground they leave stronger when they walk away.